I think. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests and speakers, my name is Lorena Mohr. I'm the head of science and protocol here at the German Embassy in Cairo, and I warmly welcome you. To our event, Action for Climate Empowerment in Egypt, expanding the space for civic action, policy recommendations by Egyptian civil society to the Egyptian and German governments. This event today is being co-hosted by the Cairo Climate Talks, CCT in short, and the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. So it's my real pleasure to have you here for this joint event. For those of you that don't yet know the Cairo Climate Talks, it's a platform, a unique German-Egyptian environmental platform that's been initiated in 2011. We just recently celebrated our 10-year anniversary last year, and we're being supported by the German Embassy here in Cairo, the Egyptian Ministry of Environment, the German Academic Exchange Service, DAAD, as well as the German Corporation for International Cooperation, the GIZ. And as Cairo Climate Talks, we are doing public events, workshops, different formats, where we're trying to raise awareness about environmental questions, and most importantly, bring together all the relevant stakeholders, policymakers, business, the scientific community, and civil society. And that's again what we're doing here today. And in the spirit of this event, today's event will give a platform to different actors from Egyptian civil society that are showing some recommendations and papers that they've been working on, addressed to Egypt, to the region, and also to us globally, internationally. For now, I have the pleasure to welcome, first of all, Mrs. Daike Potze, Director General for Crisis Prevention and Stabilization at the Federal Foreign Office. Mrs. Potze knows Egypt, as she's just been here recently visiting our embassy. Now she is in charge of the humanitarian aid, also of the German Federal Office, and so she sees firsthand the impacts that climate change has all over the world. Ms. Potze, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to this talk. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here and be able to join you today for the, as it said, 83rd Cairo Climate Talks. And I also would like to thank the Embassy, the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, and everyone who is helping these climate talks to go ahead, as were mentioned, the Egyptian Ministry of Environment, the German Academic Exchange Service, the German Corporation for International Cooperation, GIZ, as well. So I think one has to say that this is really an established format, a platform for exchange, for listening, and most importantly also for learning. And one reason for the success of this format is the participation of the different stakeholders. Ladies and gentlemen, dialogue in society between government and society is to us back home an important vehicle to create a basis for buy-in of society. We feel that civil society discourse helps us in government to get better by providing their views or by challenging us with critical views, and through that making us reflect on our positions and actions. We need the voice of civil society. They have a critical role to play. We can only benefit, we feel, from the advice from civil society as well as academia, and therefore I am very much looking forward to today's discussion. The government of Germany presented so-called guidelines on preventing crises, resolving conflicts, building peace in 2019. And here it also acknowledged that non-governmental actors, including civil society organizations and networks, academia, church organizations, political as well as private foundations, and the business sectors, that they are indispensable partners for the German government. My ministry and my directorate place also a lot of importance on this dialogue. In 2018, we founded the so-called Advisory Board to the federal government on crisis prevention and peace building. And that brings together experts from civil society and from academia. And they advise the government on these topics. They publish positions on strategic questions such as climate and security. They published an interesting paper, which you can also find online if you were interested. And end of September, for instance, they organized the Berlin Peace Dialogue, which took place in the Foreign Office. Another example of our collaboration with civil society is the so-called Weathering Risk Initiative. Together with the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research and the think tank Adelphi, we are heading an international scientific consortium which will improve the analytical foundations for decision makers worldwide, we hope, through the elaboration of a comprehensive report on forecasting climate security risks. Another important initiative is the Berlin Climate and Security Conference, which brings together relevant stakeholders from politics, scientific community and civil society again to discuss options to tackle climate-induced security risks. The 2022 Climate and Security Conference connected important initiatives in the climate security space on their way to COP27, facilitating deliberations across and between governmental and civil society stakeholders from around the globe. Ladies and gentlemen, for the German government, containing the climate crisis is an absolute priority. As Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock recently said just a few days before COP27, and I quote, "Humanity is heading towards an abyss, towards global warming over 2.5 degrees, with disastrous consequences for our life on the only planet we have. But humanity has all the instruments needed to limit the climate crisis and get on the 1.5 degree path. We know what we have to do." However, as we all know, the climate crisis is not just an environmental and development challenge, but also a threat to international peace and security. And this is very obvious from all the data we have. We know where climate change leads. And therefore, we place great importance on climate change also in my directorate for crisis prevention and stabilization. And we are all aware that to achieve those goals, we need everyone on board. We need the politics, we need governments, but we need the people, we need societies, we need civil societies to talk and resolve these issues with us. So I would like to thank everyone here for the efforts you've made, and I'm very much looking forward to today's discussions, and I wish you all an interesting discussion now. Thank you so much.
Ms. Potzel, thank you so much for these introductory words, for showing what the Federal Foreign Ministry is doing, but also for outlining so clearly once again that fighting the climate crisis cannot be done by governments alone, but is really civil society, everyone working together. Now I would like to hand over to Richard Probst, country director of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung here in Egypt. Richard has been working here for, I think, 4 years almost, and he knows very well the civil society here in Egypt. The Ebert Stiftung is very active in the area of environmental and climate issues, and Richard will also tell us a little bit about the process that is behind the 2 position papers that will be presented in the panel.
Thank you very much, Lorena. Welcome to all of you, dear Director General Pötzl, dear Herr Görrissen, dear Ali Abusina, dear Deputy Ambassador Hochmüller, and of course, most important, since we are talking with civil society, all representatives from different Egyptian civil society organizations. Willy Brandt, the German Chancellor, said, "International relations are too important to leave them to governments alone." And the climate negotiations, I know this might hurt some representatives from government, but the climate negotiations and all the COPs are the perfect example that civil society plays an important role on an international level, but should also play an important role on a national level. The Friedrich Ebert Foundation, a social democratic foundation, has been working here in Egypt since 45 years on promoting the values of social democracy, freedom, justice and solidarity. And we have been doing this in partnership with the Egyptian government, who is our host here in Egypt, and of course with civil society. Since over 30 years, we have been working with the esteemed organization of Ali Abu Sina, the EEAA, and the Ministry of Environment in Egypt. The Ministry of Environment has been a very close partner, and we always organize dialogue between the environmental civil society and the governmental bodies. The year ahead of COP was quite a moving year for us. It was a work-intensive year for all of us. Friedrich Ebert Foundation, but of course also all civil society representatives. I remember the meeting we had in December last year, right after it was announced that COP would be held here in Egypt, where we brought together a round of 20-30 independent actors of civil society and started thinking what is the process ahead. And this process was a participatory process which brought together at the end 40 to 50 organizations, individuals from academia, from civil society, NGOs, but also from companies, from social enterprises, and gathered them in different workshops to learn about the climate negotiations. Back then, there was only one Egyptian NGO registered with UNFCCC, and I'm happy to see that there are many independent civil society organizations with us here today. From this workshop evolved a discussion which we held in July at American University in presence of Mahmoud Moheldin, the UN climate champion, and in presence of the Egyptian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where the policy recommendations were refined. And I'm very happy and pleased that this process continued, where FES played a platform. I always told all our friends, our office is open. Whenever you need our meeting room, please come and work on the policy recommendation, but these are your policy recommendations. But I'm pleased that today we have 3 representatives who will be presenting them and discussing them with governmental representatives from Germany and from Egypt. What is clear, I think, from these recommendations, but also in general, is that there is no climate justice without participation. There is no climate justice without social justice, and there is no climate justice without ambition. And I think the slogan, ambition in solidarity, can be very much also found in these papers. The question of social justice for us as Social Democratic Foundation is linked to the question of generational justice. And therefore I'm extremely pleased that we have 3 young representatives from Egyptian civil society who will be here discussing their recommendations, their thoughts and their ideas with the government. But of course, these 3 are only representatives. There are many organizations, there are many great minds, thinkers behind these recommendations. Without all these persons, and I see many of you here in the room, of course these recommendations could have not been worked on. With this I would like to leave it. I would like to thank the German Pavilion and all organizations behind it, Cairo Climate Talk, for hosting us, for hosting this discussion and debate, and I wish us all a very fruitful, a critical, but of course a goal-oriented discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard, for this. I would now like to call our panelists to please come up here and take their seats. That includes also Mr. Gorrison. Fantastic. Thank you. I will be presenting each and every one of you as we're going along and you're giving your introductions. And I would like to start with Mr. Mohammed Kamal. Mohammed, it's fantastic to have you here. Mohammed is the co-founder of Greenish, an organization that we are working with very closely in the Cairo Climate Talks. I think you have been, you and your organization have been very heavily involved in the papers that we are seeing here today. And Mohammed, I would now kindly ask you to give us a first view into the recommendations and into the two position papers that you have been working on. I've seen they're very broad. They're touching on a lot of important subjects, from climate resilience to waste management to biodiversity. But however, for you, what are some crucial points, key elements that you would like to discuss with us and also with our two government representatives?
Perfect. Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for attending. My name is Mohammed Kamal. Small correction, I'm the co-director. I'd love to be the co-founder, but I'm not. I'm going to be as concise as possible. I know the time is very limited. I won't be going into detail. I do invite you to have a look at the position papers in more detail. Being and sitting on this panel is, to a large extent, an extreme privilege that I do hope to make the most out of. Not everyone gets the chance to voice the important need for enhancing climate action at the civil society level. So, across the past year, we were part of a lot of workshops, a lot of sessions, a lot of events because of COP27 being in Egypt. And it was a very unique opportunity for us to receive all this attention, importantly because it enhanced our capacity. And one of the things that we worked on, or one of the frameworks we started to work on, was the Action for Climate Empowerment sort of space/framework, which is Article 12 of the Paris Agreement, originally Article 6 of the UNFCCC Convention. And we, in September, came together as a number of NGOs in Egypt and civil society organizations and determined our priority positions with regards to Action for Climate Empowerment. At the core of Action for Climate Empowerment as a phrase is empowerment. And empowerment, very simply, is making sure that every stakeholder, regardless their background, whether it's governmental or non-governmental, private sector or not, has the right setting to fulfill their climate action. So, based on that, we came together to determine our priorities and to determine in each component of Action for Climate Empowerment what is needed for us as civil society to fulfill our role. First, Action for Climate Empowerment is split into 6 components. And the first component is on education. Our priority for education is that there needs to be a localization of content in Egypt. Educational content and training content. We need to connect education that's being disseminated to youth to local case studies and local knowledge in Egypt. 2 is training. And on training, specifically the element of capacity building. There needs to be extensive capacity building with a variety of stakeholders that starts from decision makers at governorate level in Egypt and goes all the way to curriculum developers and teachers in Egypt. And here is the unique space that civil society could come in and support the efforts of government in providing capacity building for educators and for teachers and for curriculum developers. On the third area is public awareness. And we've seen positive efforts in the past couple of years in increasing and improving public awareness on environmental and climate issues in Egypt, from government, from civil society, but this needs to still be pushed to a large extent. We need that public awareness needs to be attached to meaningful action as well, and we need to integrate communities in our awareness sessions. The fourth component, which is a very important component, is public access for information. One of the areas that we, over the past year, were also in discussion with various ministries in Egypt is enhancing and improving the mechanisms and methods for civil society to access key information on environment and find ways to integrate civil society in the data collection process for environmental issues. This is really important because we understand that government's capacity is limited to a large extent at any level, not only in Egypt. And this is where civil society could support and the general communities could support with concepts such as citizen science. The fifth component is focused on the public participation and specifically making sure that there are mechanisms for communities to voice their views, perspectives on climate change to civil society and also to government. That we have clear mechanisms to work together, to interact. It's crucial for climate action to have collaborations. The sixth element is on international cooperation. And specifically on international cooperation, what we came together to realize is there is a need for more dialogue on climate change. This dialogue needs to be national dialogue and regional dialogue. And it needs to look beyond the central elements of Cairo and Alexandria and Egypt. We need to look at communities in Upper Egypt and in the Delta. More importantly as well is the ability to create networks and establish networks at the regional level to connect case studies and to connect what other communities or what other civil society have learned or have probably gone through so that we're not restarting the wheel. This is the general recommendations and our positions on action for climate empowerment. We believe that these points will set the right space if we can work productively on them for civil society to fulfill their role in climate action. And we're actually following the negotiations to make sure that these are also on the table for the negotiations. I now want to move on to the second paper, but I just want to know how much time I probably have. I can keep going.
Very shortly.
Very short. Okay. The second paper is a set of requests that we came together as a number of also organizations. This also included a number of social enterprises from Egyptian civil society. And these requests are very specific to Egypt. They're very specific to our context in Egypt. And we, in this request, recognize that there has been a lot of progress being made specifically by the Ministry of Environment in the past couple of years on pushing environmental issues to be on the table on key discussions at the national level. However, there's still a massive need to push more efforts. We start by issues relating to single-use plastics. In Egypt, we have a severe problem when it comes to pollution. And we acknowledge the challenges faced by government in addressing these issues. However, we're running out of time, and a lot of our key biodiversity areas, a lot of our key ecosystems are still being massively affected by plastic, by other industrial pollution. And the key request we have here is that we need to push for more efforts at the legal framework or administrative frameworks on single-use plastic and other forms of pollution. The second area is on climate resilience. And specifically here, we need to make sure there is now a focus on adaptation in Egypt. And it's very important. We need more efforts on adaptation in Egypt. Without going into detail, to make sure that communities are adequately being adapted, there needs to be sustained civil society integration and capacitating. If we're going to implement adaptation projects that cost us millions of dollars, if the civil society and the local communities are not adequately integrated, if the solutions are not adequately localized, they will not be sufficiently sustained. They will not be long-term solutions. The third area, and I think I'll probably not be able to cover every area, so I'm just going to give it straight very quickly. There are areas related to the Red Sea ecosystem and making sure or acknowledging that the coral reefs in the Red Sea are in danger. And we are requesting for the Ministry of Environment and for various stakeholders to look into the ability of making the Red Sea or the coral reefs of the Red Sea protected or a protected area, recognizing the need to protect this area as a key biodiversity location. Another important request is on urban areas in Egypt. We understand the need of cities like Cairo and Alexandria to continue adapting to the needs of mobility expansion and the growing population needs. But that should not minimize or delegitimize the importance of integrating green spaces and making sure that there are important green areas in our urban environments so that our urban environments are also adequately fit for the role on the long term on adaptation issues. I would recommend for everyone to have a look at the common requests. They are very much focused on our context in Egypt. However, I do want to say something else that is not in our context in Egypt given this platform. This is a space for the Egyptian and German government recommendations. What we're seeing at COP at the moment is there is backtracking a bit on commitments, and in the negotiations we're seeing governments being very careful to what they're committing, especially on mitigation. We understand that the crisis in Ukraine is the catalyst to most of these backtracking actions. And maybe just sending my voice, especially to representatives from the German government and the German delegation here, we understand that the energy crisis especially in winter, is going to be a massive problem, and that is largely why fossil fuels are now back on the table. However, this is a reality that we're living in Egypt and in Africa, and we should not be backtracking on our mitigation efforts at the context of the negotiations in the context of development support as well. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and thank you everyone for your time and concentration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed, for that very concise input. I have heard some homework for both our Egyptian representatives and the German representatives. Now I would like to hand the word to Dr. Ali Abu Senna. Chief Executive Officer of the Egyptian Agency for Environmental Affairs. And more importantly to us, he's also a long-standing friend and supporter of CCT, for which we really thank you. He's been celebrating our 10-year anniversary together with us, so it's great to also have you here at the pavilion. You have now heard from Mohammed a lot of requests, ideas, inputs, so we'd be interested to hear your reaction to this. Also, what are these things are you maybe already doing, working on? Which one do you think you can do better? And I think also what are sort of the formats that maybe you're already working with civil society? That would be fantastic to hear. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Mohammed, for the long list you have been presenting. I will try with the limited time to respond very quickly for what you were presenting. But I would like to stress all the importance of the NGOs for helping us, helping the government, helping the community to deal with the problem of climate change and problem of pollution. It's a really very important role. We rely very much on this. During our preparation for this COP, we were very eager to ensure the participation of the Egyptian NGOs in this event, as to be honest that this was not the work of most of the Egyptian NGOs over the last years. The climate change is still very new for the NGOs in Egypt, but for us it's very important to engage them, to have the role in helping us very much in how to move forward with the climate action for implementation. As you can say, the main slogan for this COP to the implementation. So coming to the Egyptian context, I think there's a lot of progress have been made, as you were speaking, on the policy level. Now you feel it for any ministry. Ministry of Finance is speaking about green finance. Ministry of Industry is speaking about eco-industrial park. This was not achieved or was not happening long time ago. This was not really, you can feel it. Now it's really more or less we try as a Ministry of Environment to mainstream the environmental issue into the whole ministry. I think we are quite successful right now and of course we need a lot of effort to go forward, but we started very well with this. So back to what you said, we designed our national strategy for climate change for 2050, and we out of this strategy we put more than 127 projects to face the climate change impact, and we transfer this 127 to investment plan, and we put priority for 26 projects, and we already started with Nwafi project. Yesterday we were signing $10 billion mobilization of fund for different projects related to energy, related to water, related to food security, and this is something really we feel it's a very huge step in Egypt. So if we speak about the plastic bags and how we can deal with this, I would like to say that we were working as the Ministry of Environment through a national steering committee, and we adopted actually a national strategy for phasing out the one single plastic used, and even we started in implementation. We have now the legal framework, we have the waste management law, and the article number 29, it's prohibiting the one single use. We got also the executive directive of the law have been already approved. So this is a very huge step, because when we started this before, we're not able to implement it at the ground because we don't have a legal framework to do this. On the other hand, we did on the ground a lot of activities related to how we can deal with the plastic waste. Of course, with Nile, Very Nile, it's an NGO. we're supporting it very much to start for collecting the plastic waste from the Nile Valley and recycle it. This was turning up to business opportunity, and even they were using the fishermen to collect this waste from the River Nile, and we were very happy to support the NGO and to work on this on this meeting. So back to this, we were able to move forward with our agenda for climate change. We have a plan for 2050. We started with doing our national indices have been launched in July, and we put a very clear target for electricity sector, 33% reduction in the CO2 by moving for renewable energy. For the oil sector, also the 65%. For the transportation, 7%. I would like to highlight that the Egyptian government already did a lot of work from our general budget. We're not calling this as a climate projects, like we did this sustainable transportation, the electrical train, the monorail. This is something will be very coming very soon. This is something how we can move towards the clean and sustainable transportation. We spent more than, and we have our colleague from Germany supporting us, more than 12 billion Egyptian pound to upgrade the waste management system in Egypt and close the open dump sites. This is a huge investment. We did it as the Egyptian government to just deal with to be doing this on action on the ground. With the area of preventing the pollution for the Nile River, we stopped all the industrial discharge to the River Nile. We put a lot of restrictions. We were obligation on the industry to do this. So we are doing a lot of effort, but the main issue that we started with putting this clearly in the policy, how this could be integrated in the policy framework and then go down to implementation. And I think that we were successful to have a vision to our country, how we can move forward with this. Coming that you speak about what's happening worldwide, this is a very special COP. Yes, there is a lot of discussion about the energy transition. We are suffering from the crisis happening worldwide, but this is a call to be more innovative. So now we are signing a lot of agreements for moving for green hydrogen. This is a priority for Egypt. I'm attending today at 7 p.m. Launching a program with UNIDO for green hydrogen. So it is moving forward. It is one of the main priority in our national strategy that we would like to do. But also I would like to remain and stress that the government couldn't do this alone. They have to do it with the civil society. We have to give this opportunity. We are supporting the civil society. We have created in our ministry a national or general directorate for civil society, just to work with a program. And now we will about to sign a program with Germany, that part of it to support the Egyptian civil society to have a more important role. So I would like to strengthen this. So I'm happy to tell, of course, the challenge is very high, but we started this with a more systematic way from putting a very clear strategy, indices, implementation plan. Today we're also in a very important event with the GCF launching investment plan for our strategy. They provide us with a technical assistant to transfer all national strategy for climate change to a real investment plan. So we gathered more than $10 billion, but we're getting more, doubling this with a real investment in the clean technology. So we tried in this implementation COP to provide example, by doing it, to show that our interest that we can't do this alone. We have to do it with the private sector, with the financing institution, with the international community support. We have to do it with the NGO. Although Egypt is contributing only 0.6% of all the emissions worldwide, but we are really, really hardly affected. For example, the Delta Nile, we spent a lot of billions just for adaptation. It is not a profitable project. For something we didn't do, we are affected by the climate change, so we had to do it in Damietta, in Rosetta, in Alexandria. We spent billions just for adaptation. So our call also, we are supporting to move for more adaptation projects. This is why in the topic agenda, we're putting global adaptation goal has to be one of the output of this program. Financing mechanism and transparency of my financing mechanism is one of the agenda items. And it's a very good that the international community and the EU and everyone has agreed on the request of Egypt to include loss and damage in the agenda of the COP27. It has never ever happened, but this is good to ensure that this is something will be discussed during this COP to start a negotiation on loss and damage mechanism. This is something I feel it's also success for the all participants that we need to do this. So I would like to back to the Egyptian context. This is the environment issue is getting a very high priority on a very high level. We are pushing it on a more political level and on ground level, and definitely this is with the civil society. We are much in link with them to support them. So I wanted to do. I didn't like to take much time because if I respond to all this, it will take many hours. Yeah. Thank you.
Dr. Ali, thank you for this intervention. I think you touched on a lot of aspects and given some concrete examples how you're working with businesses, with NGOs. I know that I think you have to run to some follow-up appointments, but I'm sure that all of our panelists will stand ready to continue discussions with you. And I hope that will be the place later on also after the COP. Thank you.
I'm not aware with this advanced technology.
I'm sure someone of the technical team will be ready to help you. For now, I would like to hand over to Haneen Shaheen. Haneen is an independent environmental researcher, and she's also a board member of the Climate Action Network Arab World, which is representing, I think, over 120 organizations even. So Haneen is the perfect person to give us an overview, zooming out a bit of Egypt and looking at the region. And Haneen. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you so much for attending and having us here. Honestly, the intervention Mohammed made is very similar to what the region is looking for, because we are somehow living the same situation and we are facing the same scarcity on different level. And honestly, on the region side as well, we are facing different and bigger challenges, which is conflicts and different situation, different political regimes, and that put us under huge pressure and different frustration other than what is Egypt particularly is facing. However, when it comes to the climate context, we are actually asking for the same things, and it's very important to highlight the importance of inclusion of the civil society when it comes on the policy making in the region, and how important the national dialogues come from the civil society, and having a very wider point of view on what is happening on the country next door, and how we can collaborate and put the solidarity and make the connection where we can work together. Because in the region, we're facing the same challenges. The MENA region, most of it is based in Africa, and Africa is very vulnerable to the climate change. We are actually requesting the same things. But when you look at the policy that can give us the this potential to work, get the finance, and make the proper interventions to like save us from these crises, it's very minimal to see how countries are collaborating and partnering together to achieve these goals. It's also important to highlight that the regional civil society need to work together. And in order to work together, we need more flexibility when it comes to borders, when it comes to joint education, when it comes to flexibility for Egyptian civil society to go to Tunisian civil society, to Moroccan civil society, Lebanese civil society. And this exchange of knowledge, experience, and different contexts. However, the same challenges is very important for us to implement what the governments and what we want to do. And this is, unfortunately, it is very hard, especially in this time of the world. It's very hard to get a visa to go to Morocco. However we are, it's in the same region. So to have that, it's very important to have policies that support us to the freedom of transport between countries. It's also important to have collective planning and collective programs that can cover the region and can join countries together. And that can give us proper access to finance, proper planning for projects, and real action on the ground. And that's actually what need to be done currently and need to be introduced to different financial organizations. Last thing, loss and damage and adaptation is the major thing that we are working on as a region civil society members, and it's the first and the most important mandate. We succeeded to have loss and damage as an agenda item this year because of the push of the civil society, the international and the regional. And because it's an African COP and it's an Egyptian COP, it's important to get a decision out of this COP and the loss and damage facility. We have to work together. We have to keep on pushing, and the countries and the delegation needs to understand that this is the opportunity that we need to take, because what is going to happen in the future is very hard. Every COP is very challenging to address and achieve the Paris Agreement, and this is a real opportunity to get decisions, especially in that mandate, and let's not make this opportunity pass. And the access of information, that's the last thing. We need a regional access of information opportunity. It's very hard to get accurate data. It's very hard to do research. It's very hard to in order to work together, we need to understand each other context, and to understand each other context, we need this hub and library, and it's a must. So it's about time to have it, and the time is now. Thank you so much, and sorry for taking so long.
No problem. Thank you, Hanin, for taking us out of Egypt and further into the region. We are here at COP27. COP28 will also be here in the region. So great for getting this insight. Now, I think you already gave the perfect handover to Lama. We have with us also Lama Al-Hatov. She's also an environmental activist and researcher. And Lama, we are here at COP. So COP means we're not only looking at Egypt and the MENA region, but we're also looking into the global context. So of these position papers and recommendations that you have been working on, what can we take out when we look into the global context? And maybe, as we have here Mr. Gerritsen on the panel with us, how do these recommendations also translate into the German context, maybe?
Thank you. And I'd like to thank everyone here for attending this, and of course to Friedrich Ebert and the Cairo Climate Talks for hosting us for this session. Small correction, I'm an environmental and climate change consultant. So a lot of what I do is actually freelance consulting on things related to climate policy in relation to COPs, since I've attended a number of COPs throughout my life. And as these outcomes, which both Mohammed and Hanin and Dr. Ali also mentioned previously, are very, very important, I'm going to take us back and rewind a little bit on the process. Because as much as the outcomes and the end result has been very significant, I'd actually like to highlight how the process of how we got here is actually just as significant and maybe more so. So if we backtrack to December, which Richard was already mentioning in his opening speech, to December 2021, we'd originally announced that the COP was going to be happening in Egypt, and there was this massive attempt to start looking and seeing where are the environmental NGOs in Egypt within this space. And we discovered, upon looking at a stakeholder mapping, that there were quite a few. There's environmental NGOs working in spaces on biodiversity, on water, on climate change, on agriculture, but all of them in silos. Everybody's working by themselves, and very little actually have a networked capacity of being able to work together on a collaborative effort for a common cause. And there have been attempts over the years to be able to engage on a common cause in certain initiatives, but many have failed. That being said, moving forward, the COP became an opportunity. It became an opportunity of how do we begin to bring everyone together to network and to collaborate for a common vision, climate change. And in that respect, we began convening various NGOs to come together. And I was asked, obviously, by Friedrich Ebert and by Richard to be able to convene these for stakeholder mapping and for capacity building and training of the environmental NGOs in this space. But it moved beyond that. It moved beyond just training the environmental NGOs and civil society actors on climate policy and what that means. It became an iterative effort. And this participatory approach of having an iterative effort of the environmental NGOs meeting and convening with various ministries, from the ministries of agriculture, ministries of environment and water, in focus group consultations, was something that was very pivotal, that had not happened, at least not regularly, in Egypt. And that, I want to say, is quite remarkable, because these kinds of initiatives of moving forward is hopefully what we would like to have as a platform to start being a convening session moving forward after the COP. Because again, COP is a platform, but we need to also discuss what happens beyond COP. Is COP the end result? We hope not. We want to be able to see how we can begin to engage with the ministries and have the environmental CSAs and civil society actors have that platform of engagement with the various ministries after COP. So this was a very pivotal process of coming here. We ended up, as Richard mentioned, having a workshop in July where there were focus groups with the various ministries. And from that, with consultation from the American University in Cairo, we were able to come up with a policy paper that indicated all of the various needs and demands by the civil society actors in the various thematic areas. So we looked at water, we looked at agriculture and sustainable agri, we looked at mobility and urban transportation, we looked at all of the various thematic areas, gender, of course, and what would be specific demands in each of them. Those are published, and you'll be able to see them obviously on the AUC website, in consultation, of course, with the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung website, on the various demands by the civil society actors. What's beautiful about this is we didn't stop there. Many of the civil society organizations took this policy paper, began to run with it even further, and developed it further to their own specific demands in what we now have as the Common Requests paper, which you can now download and be able to see what the specific demands are of environmental NGOs. Now, CSAs in every country, on every level, are diverse. Diverse in political orientation, diverse in ideology, diverse in thematic and sectoral scope, diverse in all of that it entails. So coming up with a common vision for climate change and climate change issues is extremely challenging. And often what we end up calling, and this is everyone who's feel familiar with the COP negotiations, ends up being the least common denominator, or the aspect that is the most vague or the least watered down aspect that we can all agree on together, which ends up being, sadly and unfortunately, the case. But in this case, is actually quite progressive and quite specific and quite demanding. So I actually urge you all to take a look at those and be able to see how it can be a step moving forward. Now, an observation I've made, so I also wear another hat where I consult for the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, for the last 12 years. And previously, I was working in the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa, and for the last 2 years, I've been working in Latin America. An observation I've had in doing so is that in the Middle East and North Africa region, the NGOs are not as active as and there are some, there are quite a bit, but they're not as active. When we have public consultations, ESIA reports, there ends up being stakeholder engagement, but it often ends up being a tick-the-box procedure and process in order to comply with local regulations and standards, and sometimes even international standards instead. But there's never really a full sense of engagement. My observation, however, working in LAC in the Latin American countries, is that the environmental NGO scene is incredibly active there and incredibly powerful and quite influential. And so one of my biggest observations is, okay, well, what are the lessons learned? What can we learn from Latin America to be able to propel this forward in the MENA region? And what I ended up realizing is it's the connection with the ministries. It's the connection and the networking and the dialogue that they end up having with the actual ministries on the ground. Now, if we're able to start that process here, albeit minimally, I see some of you smiling when I mentioned that, but albeit minimally, it might have started in a small way in July, and moving forward, it is a pivotal seed that we're able to start moving forward, where the civil society actors are able to dialogue with the various ministries. They've created that connection, that network, that contact where we can go and actually discuss with the various ministries what it is that we need to do and how to move that forward. And to be fair, there is quite an appetite also on the ministerial side to be able to engage, to see how that is, where they can begin to see what are the demands by civil society in moving those actions forward. So it's a two-way street, and there is appetite clearly from both sides. I don't want to take up too much time, but a very last reference also towards what Hanin was mentioning, in that on a regional level, there is a lot of turbulence and tribulations happening across the region, and of course on a global level. So it's no secret, we're moving into a state of incredible intense global inflation across on a global level within Egypt and on a global level, and this is also due to the war in Ukraine and in Russia. We've recently just come out of pandemic, and we're still healing from the economic disturbances and supply chain issues that have been repercussions from China and otherwise. We're dealing with all of these issues, in addition to regional tensions that have been occurring. There's still a war in Syria that's going on until today. Lebanon has its extreme turmoil and a huge economic crisis with power outages that are causing people to flee en masse. We look at Sudan, and with the regime change in Sudan, there's been significant delay in how things are working. So across the region in MENA, we're also having significant delays in how things are functioning, whether it be on a political or economic standpoint. Of course, the additional question here is how can we ask? How can we actually ask many of these countries, both regionally and globally, to increase global house gas emissions and commit to climate change and commit to all that we're asking for here from the COP, with everything that they're going through, which is extremely challenging. And this is where we need to say that this is, and again, today is the finance day, so obviously it does clearly come down to money, but it comes down to us also as civil society actors to bridge that gap between the financial community and the governments, to be able to support the two in making and facilitating that, to make that happen. So I don't want to take up too much more time, but thank you for giving me the place to speak.
Thank you so much, Lama. Our last panelist, of course, now has the tough job to react to all of the input that has been given. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Norbert Görrissen. He's Deputy Special Envoy for International Climate Action at the Federal Foreign Office. Previously, he held various positions in the Federal Ministry for the Environment, so he both knows the internal as well as the external perspective. So I think you're perfectly suited to react to what we've been hearing. I've heard that there are a few points that already been specifically addressed to Germany from Mohammed. We've been touching upon issues here at the COP, loss and damage. So very interested to hear what you have to say and how you reflect on this from the German perspective.
Thank you very much, first of all, for the kind introduction, also for organizing this event. I would say two points in the beginning on this event. First, I think the Climate Cairo talks are really a success story. That is number 83, and I visited once the talks in Cairo, and I thought we should make all efforts to bring them also here to Sharm El-Sheikh. So I'm very happy that this is happening here today. And the Cairo Climate Talks are a platform in Cairo to talk about climate, open to civil society, to activists, to implementation agencies, but also to governments, to talk about the issues. Secondly, I would like to say also this concept, the concept of this pavilion. We started this kind of concept in 2017 in Bonn, when we had the COP in Bonn. and when we were not really a host of the COP, but actually we were the physical host of the COP, and we thought we needed to provide specific space for civil society, for indigenous people, for business people, for NGOs, etc. And then we thought, okay, we changed the way how we have done German pavilions until then, and we give half of the space to non-state actors, I would call it, so including private sectors, to organize themselves, use the space of the pavilion, and organize the event. And this is just one of those examples. Another example was just last night. I'm sure you heard about that. My second remark in the beginning is it's interesting for me also to move from the Ministry of Environment to the Foreign Office, but I don't want to talk about that. It's also interesting for me to have now a former climate activist as a boss. So somebody coming from the civil society, Jennifer Morgan, who was the CEO of Greenpeace International, now being my boss, state secretary. So I think that also explains a little bit how we see the involvement of civil society in Germany, at least in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So it's absolutely crucial to work with them, to listen to them, whether it's youth, whether it's women, whether it's indigenous people, whether it's the business sector, whether it's human rights organizations, whether it's, not last but not least, mental NGOs. We need them all, we need to listen to them, we need to talk to them, and we would like to provide them space. So therefore, in the preparations of this COP is what absolutely crucial for us to work towards providing the space. So we addressed that several times via various channels to the Egyptian government, and we would like to see it not only happening here in the blue zone, in the UN zone, but also outside. And we will observe what's going to happen after the COP in the country, that this atmosphere we have here right now, this inclusiveness, also being continued afterwards in Cairo and elsewhere. Because we are extremely convinced that this problem we are addressing here, the climate crisis, is a problem for all of us, but cannot be resolved only by a complex multilateral process consisting of government. It has to be inclusive, it has to include all stakeholders, all civil society participants. We need to be criticized, even if it's hard sometimes for us as officials. We need to listen to your suggestions. We are ready to listen to them, and we also need to work with you, because sometimes that's also the experience I made even before I was working for Jennifer Morgan, that working with you can also make progress. So we can ask you to do some things which we can't do in order to move the process ahead. I think the Paris Agreement would never have been possible without a very strong involvement of the civil society at large. So coming lastly also on this COP, loss and damage was the topic of Glasgow in a way, in a more contentious way. We observed that it created tensions between the parties in this year, which was anyway very difficult. You mentioned the many crises we are in, and we thought we need to work on that. So we need to be more open-minded to the subject. We need to try to build bridges. We used the Petersburg Climate Dialogue in July to open up the space to have spending a lot of time talking about loss and damage, and it culminated eventually in the situation that Jennifer Morgan and we are now facilitating the loss and damage discussions. But that's not all. You mentioned money is the other important thing. Money is important for everything here, whether we talk about loss and damage, whether we talk about adaptation, but also whether we talk about mitigation. And it's Finance Day today. We know we have an obligation regarding our public contribution. The Chancellor on Monday very clearly underlined again where we are in Germany. We already provided more than 5 billion euros in last year for public finance for climate action in developing countries. We're aiming to secure up to 6 billion, at least 6 billion per year in 2025. We are going to increase funding for adaptation to come to a more or less equivalent level between adaptation and mitigation. We are very active also on the operational side with loss and damage. The Chancellor talked about 170 million, which we will include in the global shield, which is a concrete activities we've put forward, not replacing what has to be decided here, but which is a complement outside the process. But we're also working with others. We have been active in looking at how to what extent the 100 billion pledge is operationalized. Germany and Canada has prepared a so-called progress report on the delivery plan. It's just being presented in a parallel event in Canada, in the Canadian Pavilion, and it focuses in particular on 4 areas: adaptation finance, more transparency, take it more serious, the doubling, access to finance, a problem which needs to be addressed by more capacity, by better coordination, by simplification of the procedures that will be addressed in all of the relevant institutions. That's our recommendation. The MDBs, the role the MDBs play has to be strengthened, and lastly but not finally, the private sector, which has to contribute. So having talked about climate finance, I would also say a few words on ambition and mitigation, because all of that would not help if we are not able to reduce emissions. That is where in the end we have to head towards. So therefore it's our ambition also here to push the mitigation agenda. The mitigation work program has to be something meaningful and really empower parties to come up with new pledges, new proposals, new action in the year 2030. The numbers we heard from the various reports before the COPs are shocking. We are not on the way to 1.5, we're more on the way to 2.4 or 2.7 degrees, and we cannot afford that. We will never be able to address the losses and damages which would be resulting in that. So therefore, it's also a question of justice to reduce emissions, to transform energy systems. And I think this region has particular potential here to use the sun, which is burning like hell, the wind, which is at all of the coastlines, to become a real pilot region for going towards close to 100% renewables and perhaps producing green hydrogen for all the sectors which are difficult. We're also working on that, and I fully understand your point was regional cooperation. We'll pick that up, in particular what you said of the difficulties of civil society organizations to cross borders. I think that's a small point, but an important point, which we can perhaps also make in the work we do. So thanks for being here, and we would like to do what we can in order to encourage you, empower you, and provide you the space for playing your role, your very crucial and very important role in the country, in the region, but also globally. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gordersen, for that intervention. Now, before opening up for questions from our audience, I would like to take you up on that offer to listening to civil society and give you one last quick round to each panelist. As Mr. Gordersen will be here at the negotiating table in the remaining days of the COP, do you have one specific recommendation, element from the work that you've been doing that you would like to hand to him to be thinking of in the last few days of the COP? One final aspect that each of you want to highlight, and then we would be handing over to our audience. Maybe starting off with Hanin?
Okay. Well, I have two, actually. I want loss and damage is crucial. We need to reach a decision, and honestly we need serious, real solution, no false solutions, because we have lots of opportunities, as you said, and we need real actions that can save us and develop us in a very sustainable environmental way, not just 10 years project increases the emissions and get in money with a very, very bad impact on the environment. That's my intervention. Thank you.
Thank you. Mohammed?
I think I have one thing to say or request, and it's on adaptation. There's a time limit on adaptation. We're not going to be able to adapt in the future when the impacts have reached a scale we cannot adapt to. And our inability at the moment, in the context of Egypt and many of the countries in Africa, to adapt to the environmental and climate challenges of today is a foreshadowing for the future. It's only going to be worse. So with the adoption of the new adaptation agenda and the talks on adaptation financing, the one request I have is we need more. We need more support, financial support, institutional support, multilateral, bilateral support, and specifically on MDBs. They cannot be, support cannot be to the privileged civil society, and that's a key point. I would consider myself a privileged person. I have access to, I can speak English, I can speak Arabic, I can speak 2 languages. I have access to opportunities more than other organizations. Organizations that represent the vulnerable communities usually struggle. And there needs to be equity, accessibility to the modalities for adaptation financing. Thank you.
Thank you. And Lama?
Thank you. Mine are not necessarily policy related. Mine are more on terms of civil society representation. And this is not just for yourself, but this is also for, I guess, everyone here, including Dr. Ali, I would say. Representation matters. And when I say that, I specifically mean that having proper representation, not just from civil society actors and those be present in the negotiating room, but those that really are the most vulnerable and impacted. We're in the COP, the climate change negotiations, here in Egypt, but yet many of the indigenous communities of Egypt, whether it be the Nubian tribes in Aswan or the Bedouins of Sinai, or many of the indigenous community minority groups that are the most impacted on the ground, are not present at this COP. In November of 2021 of last year, there was serious floods that hit Aswan that completely devastated the area. And I had the privilege to actually talk with some of the Nubian communities about how they're dealing with adaptation and changing their building materials for dealing with climate change moving forward. It's very fascinating work. And it's the kind of work that needs to be informed to the decision makers right here at the COP who are taking those decisions without listening to the people who are making those kinds of actions right there on the ground. And that, I think, is a huge loss opportunity for the COP and for the representation for those that matter. And when I say representation matters, yes, all of us sitting here, it's fantastic that we're all able to attend, but we are privileged. We are privileged to be able to sit here in these talks and be able to have these discussions. The most vulnerable and those who really are impacted the most and not sitting in air-conditioned tents and going home to 5-star hotels are the ones that are feeling the brunt of climate change the most, and they are not here. They are not present. And that is when I say representation matters, they need to be present too. Yeah.
Thank you, Lama, for these strong words. Mr. Goddison, do you want to give a short reaction?
Yeah, I actually can first of all say I agree to all of you. So what shall I do? So loss and damage, it's our intention in the role we have now to do what we can to come up with a really serious solution or a first step of a solution. I'm not sure whether we can come to the final solution, but working towards taking it serious, working on solutions which bring us in the direction of saving us, as you said. So it's not only depending on us in the end. So, but you have all our words and deeds to work towards. That's really a priority of the German delegation. And next week, my minister will be coming, and I know it's also her intention, and I'm sure you will hear from her. That you also will fight for that. Adaptation and the time limit, you're absolutely right. That's exactly the question. So adaptation could prevent us from coming to a situation where we are ending up with loss and damage. And more support is needed. I think there is a learning in the donor community happening over time. If you look back, I'm not saying it's enough, but I'm saying where we are right now, it's better than where we were in the past. But of course, it's not what is needed, by far not. But I think the understanding of that adaptation has to become adaptation finance has to become more central in the climate finance debate is really there. I remember very well the discussions we had last year about the idea of a request of doubling adaptation finance. However, that was difficult to get to this agreement. Now we are already at the next level, so it's stepping one step forward. But I agree to you, and it's the same with mitigation. All the progress we make is on the one hand good, but it's not quick enough. So the urgency and the speed we actually needed is not there. And on your last point, what can I say? Absolutely right. It would be great to also give those minority groups, those most vulnerable groups, representation, give them the space also to address themselves. That's not only depending on me or on the German government. It's something which has to be organized. Maybe not only by the host government. It's also something where other institutions, including private or philanthropic institutions or foundations, can play a role, really to bring them here, to make them able to address their needs in a way that it is heard. And with respect to access, we are privileged in being able, you are privileged in being able to fill out a complicated template in English to access the money. They need capacity and assistance for that. That's absolutely crucial, and that may be my last word. It is part of the work we are doing, or what we are funding, is to exactly work in this direction. Not sure whether we always are successful or really tipping the point, but we are really interested to help here with the money we have, also in encouraging the civil society to be prominent and to be able to address the issues, including what Mohamed said in his initial remarks on education and empowerment. All this, the whole ACE agenda, is something which we would like to address. Maybe we need more direct reaction from you to say how we could do it in a better way than we do so far. But it's really our intention to be there. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we do have time left for questions from the audience. So please, if you have a question, raise your hand, quickly present yourself. We do have a microphone somewhere here in the back, or if you speak loud enough, maybe from the spot we can see. Starting here. Yeah, that's... I think the microphone unfortunately cannot be moved, so you need to move to the microphone, right?
My name is Nabil El Hadi,
Kirsten Weiss.
Cairo University. I think the point that Mohammed is making, that about time, that we are facing almost 8 years of window. If we don't act, we will really be in serious trouble. My question to the civil societies in Egypt, and I think there is a lesson to be learned from what Greta and Fridays for Future did. Because actually, when Greta did the work 5 years ago, there was plenty of civil society organization in the West, like Greenpeace and other stuff. But I think what Greta did is, in a way, they accelerated and they brought the societies, the communities together to accelerate a response. And I think it's telling about the capacity and the ability of civil societies to really respond quick enough and maybe creative enough to the challenges that we are faced. Given this situation, what the civil societies in Egypt can do or can help civil, I would really like the non-state actor rather than civil society organization. So what can we do really to accelerate our response? Because this is the real question. I think given the all challenges and limitation, political, economic, and whatever, given the challenges in the government, I think we cannot simply say that we are helping advise the government on policies. We need actions. So how can civil societies in Egypt provide, empower, not simply asking German government to do that. I think this is really will not work. Definitely, it's not sustainable that we ask German government to do that for us. I absolutely admire the Friedrich Ebert work, but in some sense, this is not sustainable. If we are, as Egyptians, do not really come with ideas and local reactions, it will not work. It will never work. So I think this is a real challenge for civil societies of Egypt. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. So we have a critical questions in both directions. Who of you three would like to answer to that? Mohammed?
Thank you very much, Dr. Nabil, for that question and for the remark. It's a very important point on how unsustainable we are in Egypt when it comes to climate action. I want to set the backdrop for what I want to say, and I will not take too much time. I'm 26 years old. It did not take me too long to read into climate change and understand that the current situation, as optimistic as we like to sound, is not very optimistic. The future does not look optimistic. The impacts are happening. Climate change is not a future, it's the present. And when we look in Egypt, we're not realizing that a lot of the changes happening are climate induced. Setting this as the backdrop and now going into my experience, at least so I can give the most useful answer to this point. First, we have the general tendency to centralize our efforts, meaning that a lot of the support that goes or supposed to go to communities continues to be centralized. Things related to capacity building and development projects, there's a need to decentralize. And this is where really the role of civil society needs to be. It's not a quest for making more money. There is now an approach. So because of the context of Egypt, we have social enterprises, we have civil society organizations. But we should not forget that our role is not to make profit. Our role is not to make green websites with a lot of nice names. I'm from an organization called Greenish, so it's very funny. But it's not about using the word green and sustainable. We need the actual action is not very complicated. The actual action is sitting down with the local community and having a dialogue. And sometimes the solutions are as simple as, oh, maybe we move the waste accumulation point from this area to this area, away from the water body. It could be very simple, but it just needs dialogue. So civil society's role is what I would say summarized in two parts, especially in the context of Egypt. One, we need to really work with our communities. Using the word local can sometimes be confusing as it's people related to rural areas, but it also relates to urban areas. We need to work with our urban communities and work more to collaborate. The second part that's very important is we need a mechanism or a method to take the voice of the local communities to government, to the regional actors. And once we empower those communities and make sure that they realize that their voices are being reached, the process itself will be a form of solution. They will start to realize their own methods of adapting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I see another question in the back.
Good afternoon. This is Samira Youssef. I'm a researcher. My question is for Mr. Norbert. How does a space for civil society and the space in a pavilion means shutting down other civil society organizations from expressing the different point of views? And how is it a space for insulting also other member states and sharing false information about these member states? I think a civil society space or a pavilion should be a space for inclusivity, should be a space for respect, for having constructive dialogue as well. So I don't think that sharing a space is just an answer for having a dialogue or having a constructive information about a specific matter or a specific issue. Thank you.
Thank you, yeah. Thank you for this comment. I think this discussion here is indeed showing that we're sitting together, we're having a constructive dialogue, we're sharing our points of view, we're criticizing, so I'm quite confident that this is what we are doing here. Thank you. Are there any other questions from our audience? If there are none, then We have the great pleasure here to now also have with us Her Excellency Mrs. Leila Iskander, the former Minister of Urban Planning. And thank you for joining us here on this panel. Sorry? Yes, of course. I think this should be working. If not, our technical staff can make it work. You've been
It's working. It's working.
the discussion, so
Yes,
it would be great to hear what you're thinking as well.
Thank you. And I'm just an ordinary citizen. I come from civil society before I became a minister. So, and everybody here are my friends and my colleagues. So when I was your age, in the 80s, we had convening spaces. I think we can reopen these convening spaces again, because back then we had informal coalitions, and everybody knows when you organize in a group it's much more effective. So let's try to use that little space, the niche, to reconvene and form informal coalitions. Once you become a formal coalition, it doesn't work. Okay, so that's one, to convene in coalitions again. The other is the global stocktake now requires countries to report on how they have responded to local communities, to include civil society, and to reflect the needs of the vulnerable and the poor. The global stocktake requires that. So that's another niche we have here on asking governments, wherever we live, to show us that. It has to be public. Then there's this other climate transitional justice. We need to drive the conversation away from climate change to climate justice. It has begun, so let's ride that wave and stress it's about climate justice and development. That too is another platform we can use and talk about. I just came from a session, and many, on finance. And it doesn't sound very good because there's still, the financial institutions want to give a concessional credit, debt equity. They want to de-risk investing in Africa. It's the same old tune. But there is a new tone, and here again we need to invest that opportunity of debt swaps. And in Egypt we have a long history of debt swaps with the Italians, and I think with the Germans actually, but with the Italians I'm sure. So we need to insert our actions, whether we are a social enterprise or a nonprofit, in any debt swap program that happens. Because I tell you from my experience up there in the ministry and down there in the communities, nobody can reach the poor but civil society.
Thank you, Dr. Iskander, for sharing your experience with us, also from both perspectives. I think that's fitting exactly for this panel. We now have 5 minutes left, so I would open up the floor once again if there are any final questions from our audience. Okay, we have so many interventions here and I see no questions, then please go ahead. I think the tone is gone for now.
So, yeah, it works again. Maybe because it's in my back. So I believe it makes a very big difference when an official comes from the civil society. Like Dr. Leila, she had the context. Jennifer Morgan, she has the context. So this is what we need. And in these times, it's very important to have that kind of official, that kind of negotiator who understands what the country needs, what the region needs, and what's actually working with the people who are in danger and affected and is like in the process of losing everything, to create the right solutions and to make the right programs. And honestly speaking, it's very, very minimal in the world governments. It's like we cannot see lots of people. We have to see lots of people like Dr. Leila and Jennifer Morgan. That's what the crisis needs, and that's what we have to work on now. Thank you.
And Lama?
Thank you. The only other point I wanted to add, I thank you for that, Haneen. I think that was brilliant and spot on, honestly, for something I also wanted to add. I'll just add two very short points on that. Is it's not just simply about also having civil society being government representations. It's gender inclusivity. And that's a very important point that I think we all need to be very cognizant of, is that gender representation in these positions coming from civil society is also very, very important. That was my first point. But the second point I wanted to mention was Dr. Leila very, very beautifully mentioned this idea of the global stocktake. So in reference to the previous note I was making about representation mattering and having the inclusivity of communities, not only is it now become a requirement by the global stocktake to make sure that these communities are consulted and reported on, but also participated in this participatory process. And that starts and paves the way for something that I think is actually, we've already begun it without this process with Friedrich Ebert throughout this year. If we can continue this process with the government ministries moving forward, I think would be very, very pivotal for us to move forward. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Lama. As I think there are no other questions from the audience, it's just my pleasure to thank you all for this fantastic session. We've heard many new ideas. You made very sharp observations. You gave all of us a lot of homework. I think Dr. Ali, Mr. Gorrison, also we as the Cairo Climate Talks have taken a lot out of this session for the work that is coming up. So I thank you all for this exchange, for the critical questions, for the dialogue with all of you. And it's been our pleasure to have you here at the pavilion. Thank you.